This video continues our look into Adobe Camera Raw, shooting and editing raw images. The subject, sharpening and noise suppression. If we were to sit down to make a list of techniques that have the potential to do more harm than good, then sharpening images is going to be right at the top. It's far better not to sharpen your image at all rather than over sharpen. And for quite some years I have chosen not to sharpen my images. Now I would argue that we should wait and sharpen the image if it requires it when we know what we intend to use the image for. For example, we wouldn't sharpen a high resolution image for printing in the same way as we would a low resolution one for use as an email attachment, or maybe even in a slideshow. Now, one of the things that I see constantly is photographers trying to do the impossible. We cannot sharpen and correct for blurred images, depth of field issues, and that's what we're looking at here, or camera shake. The sharpness isn't all down to our sharpen tools either. We can have a great impact on sharpness by simply making sure we get the contrast, color and clarity right in Adobe Camera Raw. Remember that histogram? It may not appear to be initially obvious that the histogram plays any role in sharpening images. Well, it doesn't in a direct sense, but an image with a great tonal range, good color, contrast and clarity can often appear much sharper than one that has weak tones and lacks contrast. So trying to do something with an image like this is a waste of time and effort, and you're never going to end up with an image of any quality at all. Now we can sharpen images within Adobe Camera Raw. We can sharpen images also within the main window of Photoshop. Now we can consider sharpening as a global edit, but we can also just sharpen certain parts of the image, which is clearly strategic. Now we're going to concern ourselves here with Adobe Camera Raw only, so the first thing I'm going to do with the zoom tool selected is double click the zoom, because I need the image to be 100% to be able to make a judgment on how much sharpness I want to give. Not forgetting, when we touch that spacebar, we get the hand appear, and I can click and drag. So let's get a part of the guy's face and also the background. Whenever we sharpen an image, it's going to be much easier to sharpen an area of detail. So when we look at the guy's face and his whiskers, that's going to be fairly easy, and it will hide a multitude of sins. If we tend to over sharpen, or we want to push the sharpening a little more than we would like, it's going to be seen more in the smooth areas on the background. So what we can do in that case is we can mask off the areas we don't want to sharpen. Now to do this, I'm going to hit Ctrl 0 just for a moment, and I'll come back to the enlargement we've got here in a moment. I'm doing this because I'm going to go to my sharpening tools up on the top right and down here to the mask, because I want to hold the Alt key, and while I'm holding the Alt key, if I click the mask, you can see what happens. As I move forward, the white areas are the areas that are going to take sharpening, and the black areas are not. So I can choose this mask. I'm still going, but I've still got detail on the soldier himself. So I could decide that I'm going to stop the masking around about there to try to limit any sharpening that I apply to mainly him and not the background. So let me double click the zoom once again, and I'll drop him into that position, and we'll take a look. When we go to the sliders here, the amount you can think of as a strict volume control, This will broaden out what is about to be sharpened, and the detail, generally we would use that if we've got an image with a lot of detail within it. So here I think we're probably only going to need the amount. I'm going to leave the radius set to 1, but what I'm going to do is to step the amount up, because it's a case of what we see is what we get. So we need to let our eyes tell us whether we've got this right. So let me step the amount up. Well, let me step it up quite high for a start. Let's go way up to the right hand side and click. Now let's look and keep our eyes around this sort of area, and we'll see the effect we're going to get. Did you see that? Remember, you're looking at a slightly compressed video, but let me double click that slider. Keep your eyes around the guy's lips and his mouth. There you can see it's got a lot softer. So let me bring it up not quite so far, and there you can see things sharpen up. If it's not working as well as you would like and you think you can squeeze more in, then you can maybe consider increasing the radius. Let's increase it to, well, let me push it up to about 2. Then I'll double click that slider and bring it back again. Keep looking at the guy's whiskers. Now you can see we're having quite a good effect on the sharpening of the guy's face. But if you look into the background on the left hand side, we're not having a great deal of effect there. But you may spot one area where we're having a little bit of an effect. Can you see that white halo line around there? Let me take my sharpness off. Keep your eye on that point. We've got a little bit of it already, and that's probably caused by the clarity slider in the other tab. So we've got to be a bit careful here if we do decide to, excuse me, almost cough then. If we do decide to add sharpening, we've got to be minimal in what we do. But let me push this up, and then I'll hit Control 0 so we can get a view of the image as it's going to be seen in most cases. So if we do have a picture where we want to push quite a bit of sharpness in it, then I would suggest we do it a little bit more strategically. But even in a picture like this, where I'm doing a global change, I'm still masking some areas of it away. Now the worst part I've already pointed out is that little line around the hat there. Now there is things we can do about that, but I feel that's probably for another day. We'd get a little too involved here because I'd probably deal with that in Photoshop. But what we've done there is given the face a fair degree of sharpness. Should we take one last look? Because I've said at the start of this video that I very rarely sharpen my images, and I wait until I know exactly what I'm going to do with them. So I'm going to take the sharpness off here. I'm going to double click the amount. You see, the difference is not significant. We still have a sharp image, and I still feel that if this was going to be printed, we would get a very, very sharp image. Always look a little bit sharper on a print than they do on screen for some reason. But if we do want to step it up, there you can see the amount we're going to get. We can experiment with the detail here, but I'm not sure it does us a lot of good with this image. If I take the detail off, you can see the image softens just a little bit because I'm taking away much of the sharpness I'm putting in. And if I push it up further, then we can see we're definitely over sharpening the image, and we start to see all sorts of problems around the guy's skin, eyes, nose, and not good. So let's reset that back to its default setting. So I think the amount I'm going to be looking for is somewhere around there. And if I was going to sharpen the face, then I think that's the limit I would go to. Now what I've just done to this image is to remove all of the settings that I placed in it a few moments ago. Because let's have a look at applying some sharpness via an adjustment brush. So I'm going to go back to my standard basic tab here, and then up to the top left I'm going to go to my zoom tool and I'll zoom in. I'm also going to pick up the adjustment brush. You'll notice there's two pins already on the face. One of them I use to just lighten the face a little bit, and the other one I use to just lighten the eyes a little more. So please ignore those. I've got the little dot in a new pin there. So all I really need to do is just for the moment just sweep my pen across there, and you can see the pin appear. I'm going to mouse over that, right click, and reset all of those local correction settings. Because what I want to do here is move down to the sharpness controls here. Now the sharpness control will go 100 to the right as a plus 100 and a minus 100 on the left. So I think I'll start with a midway point. So we would be talking somewhere around 50. So let's start around that position. Looking down at the brush, we know the brush size we can change with the square bracket. We've got a feather here. We've got the flow set to around 7. I'm going to push the density way up, I think, to 100. Because what I'd like to do here is just start to brush around the face and try to lift the sharpness in this area. Now to tell the difference, I'm going to touch the P key. And I'm not seeing a great deal of difference at all. So going back to the pin, and you can see I've got it well masked now, I'm going to click the pin to bring it alive, and I'm going to push the sharpness further forward. Now I did see a marginal change there, but it's not massive. But maybe if I can hit that P key again. Now we are seeing a difference, but we're just seeing it in the area that I've actually got masked. And remember we was talking once before about if we actually go too far with these brushes. Let me turn this back on, because I could go up here and select erase, and when I get the erase I can then start to take off some of the overspill down there if it was causing me some problems. It isn't here, but I thought I would just take the opportunity to demonstrate that. So coming back to the add, the pin is still live. So what I can do, if I wanted to extend it up to his cheek, if there was other areas I wanted to enhance the sharpness, I could do it down here. So here we're just putting in as much local sharpness, strategic sharpness, as we feel we need. And we're looking for power in this guy. After all, he's a soldier, so we're not too worried about bringing out the lines in his face. And to be honest, I can see a little bit more movement now. So now I'm just restricting this to his face. Maybe we could run over the edges of his hair to sharpen them up a little bit. But you can see how this is very measured, and certainly better than doing it all over the picture. Let me select my hand tool, and those pins will disappear. Now with this image opened up into Adobe Camera Raw, I'd like to draw your attention to the technical data just below the histogram. I think I could do with just a little more light in this too, maybe a little bit more whites too. But I want to draw your attention to the data here. 125th of a second, f5.6, so fairly shallow depth of field, given I'm using a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, but on this occasion it's set just around 310 millimeter. But you can see to get those values the lighting was nice quality but not great in quantity. In other words, the light was low. So you can see I've got an ISO there of 1600. Now I've done a bit of work on this image. One of the things we need to try to avoid doing is underexposing images where we have to push up the ISO, because if we try to raise too much detail from shadow areas, then the noise starts to be a little bit tricky to fix. But as long as we get a reasonably good exposure, we can usually do quite a bit. Now when we're looking at the picture at this size, it looks fine. So what I need to do next is to raise this up to at least 100%. Now I could go up to the top left of the screen and double click, but given that I've already got the zoom tool selected, I can just move on to the picture, right click and go straight to 100%. And now you can see with the image editing I've done that the noise has been quite greatly enhanced. So we've got some work to do here. We're never going to get a really top quality image out of this, but we certainly can improve matters. And I think we've got a little bit of colored noise too. So let's go to the option we want, which is at the top left of that row of tabs. It's the same area we deal with sharpness, but we need to come down here and deal with noise reduction. I'm going to start with luminance. I'm going to stack that up to at least halfway and look at the difference it's made to the image. It's made quite a considerable difference when we see it. Let me double click and reset it, and up to about halfway. Let's try going a little further. Even that looks pretty good. Let's just dwell on that for a moment, because the good thing about the tools in Adobe Camera Raw here, they do a great job at smoothing out the noise, but the idea is to do it without softening too many edges. So it doesn't hurt sometimes to double click these sliders and just look around the image carefully. To be honest, I think we could get away with about 60 on that slider. Now I've just hit Control 0 to fit the image on screen, because when I'm talking about noise reduction I'm never entirely sure what to say to you, the listener, because every picture we're going to apply these sliders to is going to be different in content, tone, color, contrast. So it's quite difficult to be specific. You know, some tools you can say, look, in this situation do A, in this situation do B. I can't seem to find a way to do that with noise reduction. You sort of have to fly by the seat of your pants. So let me just reset this back to 200% for a moment, and we'll drag it down here. I have picked an image with quite a bit of noise in it, but there's no point in using something that doesn't have noise to demonstrate a noise reduction set of sliders. So we've done quite a bit here. Let me just double click that noise reduction and we can see just how much we've done, and it's even worse when we look at it at 200%. We was up in the 67, 68, something like that. When I come to the luminance detail, if we look at this little area here, if I take the luminance detail off, you can see the picture just smooths out a little more. We'd have to make our own judgment on whether we felt that was better for the image we're using. If I go to its maximum, you can see it doesn't do a great deal for us. It sharpens up everything and it just seems to make matters worse. So I'm not finding that's helping me at all. Luminance contrast, it's set currently to 0. Let's just step it up to its maximum, because that's going to give us a good idea of what it does. And it's not actually having a great deal of effect. Let's take it off again, put it on again. Very little benefit one way or the other. You can see what I mean. Each picture is different. Color. Let's have a look at the color in the bird's eye. If we push this up to the far right, you can see a lot of color seems to be removed, and if I bring it down here, it makes it worse. Double click to reset. So if we wished, we may be able to just move a little bit to the right, take away some of the color in the pixels that are visible. Remembering, of course, we do have this at 200%. And then the color detail, once again, take the color off and look at the difference. Very little difference there. Push the color up, and that's not good. So instantly we know at least which way we would move this slider, but in this instance I think the default setting is working. Color smoothness, if I can say it, is the last one. If we go to the left, not a great deal of change there. Back to the middle, well, a little bit around just above the beak. Let's have a look at that. but it's minimal. Let's go the other way. Again, very little there. Let's double click and I'm looking at the eye. It does take away some of the color pixels in the eye if that was important, but other than that it's not doing a great deal. So either Control 0 or right click, fit in view, and I think after doing that, I don't know about you, but I think it just needs a little bit more contrast. Now let me have a look at that quickly by going to my basic tab. I'll put a bit of extra clarity in there, maybe a little bit of shadow detail, a little bit more whites, drop the exposure a little bit. There you can see fine tuning is all we need. To finish this video, let's take one more look at defeating noise. As you can see, I've got quite a close-up here of a kookaburra. But if you look up just below the histogram at the details used to shoot this picture, we can always tell quite a bit about how the author went about it. 800 ISO. Well, we would only push the ISO up to that sort of level if we absolutely had to. Then we look at the focal length of the lens being used, 400mm. If we were hand holding a 400mm lens, there's a good guide that says always try to get a shutter speed at least equivalent to the millimeter of the lens you're using. So here, if I was hand holding, I'd want at least 400, more if I could get it. When you look and see the actual shutter speed used was 30th of a second, you can tell instantly this was shot from a tripod. So let's take a look at the noise when we look at it at 100%. I'll double click the zoom. Remember, we always see the noise more in those smooth backgrounds than we do on the image. And you'll notice every image is different. This one has hardly got any noise at all. There's a little bit there, but not much we would have to deal with. So I'm going to suggest on this occasion, if we went to our noise options, we can almost, I think, ignore all of these, because I know from my own experience that just pushing the luminance up a tiny amount, it will smooth that out somewhere around about 30. I'm using a 20 megapixel camera here, and I found that up to about 30 is good. Now I just accidentally knocked the picture out of place, so if it's not in exactly the same place as it was a few moments ago, my apologies for that. I'm conscious of the fact when we look at these images that you're viewing this through a slightly compressed video. So when we're trying to look at very fine detail in things like noise, it can be sometimes difficult to see and demonstrate. But if in doubt, the best thing to do is to just look carefully at a particular area, and if you need to, go up a bit bigger. Then you can double click the luminance to take it off. So there's the starting point. There's the end point, and we get to see the amount of smoothness we're getting before and after, somewhere around 30, and I think I could live with that. Just before I bring this video to a close, a thought has just come to me, nothing to do with sharpening or noise reduction, but image editing in general. I think there's 3 skills photographers need. They need the technical skills to know how to set the camera at the take-in stage, but they also need image editing skills. If not, we wouldn't need to do videos like this. But there's an umbrella that almost sits over both of those, and it's understanding what makes a good picture. Because when you think about it, you need to know that just before you press the button, and you certainly need to know it when you're sitting like we are here with an image in Adobe Camera Raw and we're considering what needs to be done. But when you do look at this picture, I can see that I've got a fair bit of work to do here. Nothing that we can't do, but first of all I've got to deal with the highlights in the background. I've got to subdue them quite considerably. I'm almost certainly going to use a radial filter to darken the edges and the corners. I may want to darken down the lighter feathers on the bird and push up the colour a little bit, but I'm almost certain to want to just lift the tones around the eye of the bird, because for reasons I'm not quite sure of, they seem to be the greatest shadow area on the whole picture. So they're the sort of things that we need to consider when we're sitting in front of our thumbnails, albeit a big thumbnail here, but that's generally what it is. So have you enjoyed this topic? Of course you have. You're still here. And seeing as you are still with me, let me repeat what I said a little bit earlier on. You're better off not sharpening an image at all, rather than overdoing it. Now, if you're viewing on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you get informed when I put up new content. This video is just one small part of shooting and manipulating raw files, a whole group of videos, and I'll put a link to that in the more information below. Now, I wonder if you've found my Flickr galleries yet. It may be worthwhile taking a look and bearing in mind when you do that none of those pictures have been sharpened at all. You'll find a link to the Flickr galleries that could, in the fullness of time, be called Smug Mug because they've been purchased by another company, but at the moment it's still Flickr. I have a link on the main page of my website at the address at the top of this page. Remember, image editing is a number of small steps. Sharpening and noise suppression is just one of those steps.